don't know if there's anything more soul-killing than watching someone else take a bow for your hard work, especially when it's your boss. You put in the extra hours, sacrifice your weekends, show up early, stay late, solve problems no one else even notices, and then stand silently while someone else smiles and accepts the applause. That's how it started for me, quiet, tolerable. I told myself it was just part of climbing the ladder. I was only 26 when I landed a junior analyst role at a fast-growing tech firm. I was hungry to prove myself, eager to learn, and willing to go above and beyond. My boss, let's call him Craig, was everything I thought I wanted to become. Sharp suit, charming smile, a corner office with skyline views. He remembered people's birthdays, brought donuts on Fridays, and could drop a joke in the middle of a board meeting like a stand-up comedian. Everyone liked Craig, and why wouldn't they? He was charismatic and calm under pressure. He never micromanaged. At first, I felt lucky to be under his wing. When I joined the team, I was the youngest person in the department by almost a decade. Most of the senior analysts were already established. Some were coasting, others were just waiting for retirement packages. I quickly realized that the real path to recognition was by taking initiative on special projects. So I started doing just that. At first, it was small things. I built a dashboard that automated some of our weekly reporting. Nothing major, but it saved our team a few hours a week. I shared it with Craig. He smiled, nodded, and said, "Good work, kid. I'll make sure this gets noticed." It got noticed, all right, just not with my name attached. 2 weeks later, at an all-hands meeting, Craig did a live demo of the dashboard and presented it like it was his baby. I was sitting there in the back, watching people nod and clap and compliment his brilliant idea. I expected him to at least glance my way, maybe say I helped. He didn't. And I didn't say anything either. It was just a dashboard, I told myself. I was new. Maybe this was how it worked, and it wasn't just once. Over the next year, I became Craig's secret weapon. He started giving me special assignments, always privately, never in email. I'd get data cleaned, models built, visualizations created. I'd run mock reports, conduct research, analyze trends, and every time I'd watch those very same things show up in Craig's slide decks and memos without so much as a mention of where they came from. I brought it up once, lightly. "Hey, would it be okay to list me as a contributor on that Q3 forecast deck? I put a lot of work into it." Craig just laughed and said, "Don't worry, I'm keeping track. You're on the radar." I stayed quiet for a while longer, but inside, resentment was growing. I started noticing patterns. Craig would only communicate major assignments verbally, nothing in writing. He'd pull me aside after meetings, call me after hours, or drop by my desk when no one else was around. If I asked for clarification later via email, he'd reply with vague instructions like, "Same direction we discussed." It was deliberate. He was covering his tracks. Meanwhile, I watched other coworkers get credit for far less. Someone built a mildly useful spreadsheet, and they got applauded in a department email. Another person presented an idea I'd casually floated in a meeting 2 weeks earlier, and Craig went out of his way to praise them. I realized he wasn't just stealing from me. He was actively preventing me from being noticed at all. Like I was a secret weapon he didn't want the rest of the world to find out about. It got worse the day Craig was promoted to senior director. He now oversaw not just our team, but 2 additional departments. Guess who he recommended to replace him as team manager? Not me, not even close. He pulled in someone from another team, someone who hadn't even worked in analytics before. I was stunned. I asked him for feedback, and he told me, "You're good, but you're not leadership material yet. Give it a few more years." I didn't show it, but that one hurt. I had bent over backwards for this man, skipped vacations, fixed his errors, wrote white papers under his name, and now he was telling me I wasn't leadership material? I started seeing him for who he really was, a career parasite who survived by absorbing the light from others and reflecting it as his own. That's when I decided to get smart. Instead of confronting him directly, I started documenting everything. I created a separate, offline folder where I stored copies of every major deliverable I worked on. I timestamped versions. I wrote detailed project notes and kept screenshots of Slack conversations. I used metadata. I forwarded drafts to my personal email with subject lines like March Forecasting Model V2, authored by me. I even began casually CCing other team members on work-related messages, subtly creating a paper trail of my contributions. At the same time, I stopped giving Craig polished work. I'd send him raw drafts, unfinished versions with intentional errors or gaps, just to see what he'd do. Sure enough, he started presenting these flawed versions to others, and when people poked holes in the data, he'd come crawling back asking for fixes. I'd rescue the project, of course, but now I had proof that I was the one saving his neck. But the real turning point came when our company was acquired by a larger firm, and they announced a complete restructure. New executives, new leadership roles, new eyes on everything. That was my moment, and I was ready. When the acquisition was first announced, everyone around me reacted with the same predictable mix of nervousness and forced optimism. Some people feared layoffs, others hoped for raises, and most just tried to keep their heads down while they waited to see which way the wind would blow. Me? I saw an opportunity. For once, the corporate hierarchy was vulnerable. The existing power structures were being questioned, new decision-makers were coming in, and no one's position was truly safe, not even Craig's. That's when the internal audit began. As part of the merger, the new parent company wanted to understand who did what, how teams were structured, and where redundancies existed. They initiated a top-to-bottom talent assessment. Executives from the new leadership team began hosting one-on-one interviews, asking managers to justify the roles and performance of their direct reports. Craig looked confident at first. After all, he had years of slide decks, project summaries, and quarterly presentations under his belt, all polished with his name front and center. But I knew the truth, and I had a plan. I didn't rush into anything. I waited. For a few weeks, I just listened. I paid attention to the questions being asked during departmental reviews. I observed who was being brought into more meetings, who was being asked for input, and, most importantly, who the new executives seemed to trust. One of them was a woman named Alina, a sharp, no-nonsense VP of strategy from the acquiring company who was now overseeing our entire division. She had a reputation for sniffing out fraud and inefficiency like a bloodhound. People were terrified of her. I was intrigued. I scheduled a meeting with her assistant, just a quick 20-minute check-in. I positioned it as a proactive touch point to discuss how my skills could be better aligned with post-merger goals. That was the bait. And she took it. When I met with Alina, I came prepared, not with complaints, not with accusations, but with results. I brought a copy of a predictive revenue model I'd developed 6 months earlier, one that had been publicly credited to Craig in our Q2 town hall. I walked her through it line by line, explaining the methodology, the assumptions, the limitations. I even showed her the original version I had emailed to Craig weeks before the presentation. Her eyes narrowed. "Wait," she said, pausing over a tab in the spreadsheet. "This framework, this is yours?" I smiled. "Yes, ma'am. I built it after hours over 2 weeks. Craig was supposed to review it and give me feedback, but the next time I saw it, it was on a slide in his presentation." She sat back in her chair and crossed her arms. Interesting. I didn't push. I didn't say anything nasty. I just let the truth sit there and breathe. 2 days later, I got a follow-up email from Alina's office. "We'd like to schedule a second meeting to review your other contributions. Please bring any additional materials you'd like us to see." I knew then that the gears had started to turn. Meanwhile, Craig was still oblivious. He strutted around like a rooster, acting like the transition was his moment to shine. He kept volunteering for high-visibility projects, all while quietly asking me to prep the material behind the scenes. I played along, but now I had a strategy. Every time I gave him a piece of work, I simultaneously uploaded a time-stamped version to a private OneDrive folder, shared with only myself and Alina's office. I even gave the folder a professional name, Departmental Work Samples, prepared by my name. It didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into the restructuring process, I overheard Craig arguing on a call in his office. The walls were thin. He was clearly flustered, repeating things like, That's what I was told, and of course I supervised it, and my favorite, well, who else would have done it? That was the beginning of the unraveling. It started subtly. He was asked to present a new proposal at an executive roundtable. He came to me in a panic, claiming he had double booked and needed me to write the presentation for him. I agreed, on one condition. I added a final slide titled Analyst Attribution and Development Opportunities. On that slide, I listed every team member who had contributed to the work in the past year. My name was first. The file was submitted via our new project tracking software, which logged authorship metadata. Craig didn't notice until the day of the presentation. By then, it was too late. The attribution slide was up on the big screen for all the VPs to see. Afterward, I heard from someone in HR that he had tried to explain it away as an intern's idea. But the problem was, my name wasn't just on that slide, it was starting to show up everywhere. I began volunteering for cross-functional task forces, submitting ideas directly through the company's new innovation portal, which logged user submissions by employee ID. I reached out to colleagues in other departments to offer support with data cleaning and visualization. Slowly, people started associating me with the work that mattered. And Craig? He started losing his grip. At one team meeting, he tried to present a market segmentation report I'd compiled. He flubbed a key detail, got the demographic slice wrong, and I had to jump in to correct him. Afterward, one of the directors thanked me for the clarification, right in front of him. Craig gave me a tight-lipped smile and said nothing. The tension was growing. And then came the reorg announcement. The company was officially merging two departments, analytics and strategic planning. They would now fall under a single umbrella, and a new leadership role, Director of Insight Development, would be created to oversee both. It was a coveted position, high visibility, strong budget, direct access to the executive team. Craig assumed he was a shoo-in. After all, he'd been with the company for over a decade. He started lobbying for the role before it was even posted, casually slipping into conversations things like, "When I step into the new director seat," or "We'll clean that up once I take over the unified team." What he didn't know was that Alina had already scheduled final round interviews, and I had one. During my interview, I laid it all out, calmly, professionally. I brought a binder filled with work samples, original drafts, before and after versions, contributions to cross-department projects. I had positive testimonials from 4 different directors who had benefited from my work in the past 6 months. I even included printouts from the innovation portal showing my top-rated submissions. And then I told the story. Not with venom, not with drama, just the truth. "I've been in this department for 5 years," I said. "For most of that time, I've worked hard behind the scenes. My goal has always been to elevate the work, not necessarily my own name, but in hindsight, I realized that allowing someone else to consistently take credit didn't just hurt me, it hurt the team. It created a culture where silence was rewarded more than skill. I want to change that. I want to build a culture of visibility and trust." Alina nodded slowly. "That's exactly what we need." A week later, I got the offer. I didn't just get promoted, I got his job, and more. I still remember the exact moment Craig realized what had happened. It was a Tuesday morning. The calendar invite had gone out the night before, just a vague block of time labeled Department Realignment Announcement. No details, no agenda, just a location, Main Conference Room, B. That room, by the way, seated about 50 people, which meant this wasn't going to be some private one-on-one chat. This was going to be public. People started arriving early, whispering, trying to figure out what was about to go down. I played dumb, sitting near the back with my laptop open and a water bottle in hand. Craig showed up a few minutes late, probably assuming the whole thing was a formality, just some HR restructuring jargon that didn't concern him. He looked smug as usual, wearing his signature navy blazer and flashing his fake "I've got this" smile. Alina walked in with a few other VPs trailing behind her. She greeted everyone warmly but wasted no time. She stood at the front of the room, cleared her throat, and said, Thank you all for joining us this morning. As part of our ongoing integration efforts, we're pleased to announce a new leadership structure that we believe will better align our strategic goals across analytics and planning. Everyone fell silent. This newly created role of Director of Insight Development, she continued, will oversee all internal data analysis, forecasting, cross-department modeling, and strategic reporting. It's a central position, one that will help drive collaboration, transparency, and innovation. Craig was nodding along, like he was waiting for the crown to be placed on his head. And starting next week, she said, turning slightly toward the back of the room, that role will be filled by someone who has shown outstanding leadership, technical expertise, and quiet strength during this entire transition. Please join me in congratulating our new director, my full name. For a moment, no one moved. There was a pause, maybe half a second, where even the air in the room seemed to hold its breath. Then people started clapping. I stood slowly, forcing my hands not to shake. My heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from satisfaction. I walked toward the front, smiling at the surprised faces, the stunned silence from some corners, the polite applause from others. I made eye contact with Craig for half a second, and that was all I needed. His expression didn't change immediately. That was the most delicious part. It took him a few seconds to process what he'd just heard. His smile faltered, his eyes darted toward Alina, then back to me. He blinked. I could almost see the gears in his head grinding to a halt. I knew that look. That's the look of a man who just lost everything he thought was guaranteed. I shook Alina's hand, said a few words about how excited I was to support the team, and then returned to my seat. Craig didn't clap. He didn't move. He just stared down at the table in front of him, like he was suddenly trying to remember how gravity worked. The meeting ended shortly after, and people started trickling out. A few colleagues came over to congratulate me, some genuinely happy, others cautiously polite. I didn't care. I was too busy watching Craig gather his things with jerky, robotic movements. He walked straight past me without a word and didn't even look up as he left the room. That afternoon, he called out sick. The next day, HR called him in. See, getting the promotion was only part of the plan. The other part, the one I had worked on in parallel, was making sure the truth about Craig didn't just disappear into the ether. I didn't want him just embarrassed. I wanted him exposed. So over the past few months, as I'd been building my case to prove my own value, I had also been gathering a different kind of documentation. Emails, files, Slack messages, meeting recordings, witness accounts. I'd even created a color-coded spreadsheet titled Attribution Map that cross-referenced project files with dates, authors, and version history. There was no room for interpretation. It was a digital footprint of fraud. And I gave it to Alina. Privately. Off the record. I told her I wasn't looking to press charges, but I felt it was important for the company to know what had been happening under its own roof. I made it clear that while I wasn't looking for revenge, I did expect integrity and accountability. She didn't respond right away, but she took the folder. So when Craig walked into that HR meeting the next day, I can only imagine the surprise waiting for him. I never found out the exact details. HR doesn't talk, of course, and Craig wasn't exactly sending out group texts. But here's what I do know. By the following Monday, his LinkedIn profile had been updated. Seeking new opportunities. His company email bounced. His name was removed from internal directories. He wasn't fired, at least not publicly, but he was gone. Quietly and quickly. Word spread, of course. Offices are like high school with worse lighting. People asked questions. Whispers floated around the break room. Some claimed he had stepped down voluntarily to pursue consulting work. Others said he had been offered a severance package in exchange for disappearing quietly. I never confirmed or denied anything. I just smiled, kept doing my job, and made sure every project I worked on had proper attribution. That's when the emails started. Craig emailed me from his personal address about 2 weeks after his departure. It was short. Cold. I know what you did. I didn't respond. A few days later, another message. You think this makes you look good? Everyone knows you're a snake. Still, I didn't reply. The third email came late at night. Longer. angrier, rambling. He called me ungrateful, said I was nothing before he mentored me, accused me of manipulation, told me I'd never earn respect because everyone would always see me as the assistant who got lucky. That one I saved in a folder marked, "In case of escalation." HR didn't need it, yet. But I wasn't taking chances. Eventually, the emails stopped. I heard from a friend in another company that Craig had tried applying for a few senior roles, but couldn't get past the second round of interviews. Apparently, the people doing the hiring knew someone at our company. His reputation had caught up to him. Meanwhile, I was thriving. In my first 3 months as director, I launched a mentorship program to develop junior analysts. I created a new project tracking protocol that ensured every contribution was logged and credited. I encouraged people to present their own work instead of funneling everything through a single manager. And the department responded. Morale improved, productivity increased, people were finally being seen. But the best part? At our next quarterly town hall, I gave a presentation on cross-departmental forecasting strategies, one of the same topics Craig had once claimed as his own. This time, I didn't just present the work. I ended my talk with a slide that read, "Contributors who made this possible." And I read each name out loud, one by one. People clapped louder for that slide than they did for the strategy itself. Because here's the thing, revenge doesn't always have to be loud or messy. Sometimes the most satisfying justice is simply being seen for who you are, while the person who tried to erase you fades into the background, forgotten, uncredited, and irrelevant. And Craig? Well, he was never the light. He was just a mirror. And I stopped standing in front of him. Stepping into Craig's role wasn't just about getting promoted, it was about cleaning up the mess he left behind. I quickly realized that for years, our department hadn't just been under bad leadership, it had been under toxic leadership. People were brilliant, but afraid, talented, but invisible, motivated, but constantly second-guessing whether it was even worth speaking up. Craig had built an empire on charm and deception, where credit flowed upward and blame trickled down. The longer I sat in the director's chair, the more I saw just how deeply that rot had spread. My first week was a whirlwind of introductions and awkward smiles. Some people congratulated me warmly. Others seemed unsure how to treat me, especially those who had been Craig's favorites or who had turned a blind eye to his behavior for years. But I wasn't interested in settling scores. My goal wasn't to punish anyone, it was to fix what he'd broken. The first thing I did was sit down with every single person on the team, one-on-one, face-to-face. I asked them the same 3 questions. What are you best at? What do you wish you were doing more of? And what's something Craig never let you say out loud? At first, most of them hesitated. I could see the doubt behind their eyes. They weren't used to being asked for input unless there was an angle, a catch, a trap waiting at the end of the conversation. But once they realized I wasn't baiting them, the answers started pouring out. One analyst told me she'd been submitting revised dashboards for over a year, only to watch Craig reject them and then present her exact changes 2 months later as his new idea. Another said he had built a machine learning model in his spare time that was shelved because Craig didn't understand it well enough to explain it to higher-ups. A third admitted that he'd started applying for jobs last year, not because he didn't like the company, but because he didn't think he had a future here. Each story added another brick to the wall of confirmation I had already built. Craig hadn't just used me. He'd used everyone. I wasn't the exception. I was just the last one who stayed long enough to fight back. I created a plan. Step 1. Transparency. We implemented a project management system that logged contributions in real time. No more verbal assignments. No more invisible hands doing invisible work. Every file had a paper trail. Every update had a timestamp. It wasn't about micromanaging. It was about visibility. If someone stayed late to finish a project, their effort wouldn't get swallowed up into a generic team success report. They'd be seen. Step 2. Redistribution. I started assigning leadership roles on a rotating basis for different projects. People who had been stuck in the background were suddenly in charge of client meetings, presentations, and strategy calls. And they crushed it. The shy junior analyst with the data cleaning script, turns out she was a phenomenal communicator when she wasn't being silenced. The guy who built that shelved ML model, I paired him with one of our new senior planners, and together they revamped our entire customer segmentation pipeline. Step 3. Cultural reset. I hosted monthly work-in-progress sessions where anyone, from interns to directors, could show unfinished work and get feedback in a low-pressure setting. No hierarchy, no judgment, just collaboration. We also held Win Wednesdays, where people submitted anonymous nominations for team members who had gone above and beyond. I made sure those wins were shared in all hands meetings, emails, and our internal dashboard. At first, it felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill. People were hesitant, conditioned. You could see it in how they spoke, always softening their ideas with disclaimers like, "I'm not sure, but," or "this might be stupid, but." It took time. Trust doesn't snap into place overnight, especially when the last person in charge turned gaslighting into an art form. But slowly, things started to shift. One afternoon, about a month into the new structure, I was walking past the break room and heard laughter. Genuine laughter. Not the forced kind that comes out during awkward team-building exercises, but the kind that bubbles up when people feel safe. I peeked in and saw 3 analysts crowded around a laptop, playfully arguing about a color scheme for a dashboard. It was such a small moment, but it nearly stopped me in my tracks, because that wouldn't have happened before. Craig's version of leadership thrived on fear. Mine had to thrive on freedom. And people noticed. It started with small things. Other departments reaching out to ask how we were managing to keep up with post-merger reporting demands without burning out. Then came the recognition. Our quarterly KP is jumped. Employee satisfaction scores hit record highs. Alina sent me a message one morning that simply said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Then came the outside attention. We were invited to present at an intercompany strategy summit. I nominated 4 junior staffers to represent our team. They built the deck, rehearsed together, and delivered it flawlessly. The Q&A session ran over time because so many people wanted to know how we had implemented our attribution system. One exec asked, "Who was the architect behind this?" And instead of pointing to me, the team just smiled and said, "All of us." It was the proudest moment of my professional life, but not everyone was happy for us. One afternoon, I received an anonymous message on LinkedIn, no profile picture, just a fake name. The message read, "Heard your team's riding high. You won't be for long. Enjoy it while it lasts." I didn't have to guess who it was from. The bitter tone, the veiled threat, it was textbook Craig. I considered blocking the account, but instead, I replied with a single sentence, "We don't ride anything we didn't build ourselves." He never wrote back. I found out through a mutual contact that Craig had tried to start a consultancy. He was offering executive coaching and innovation strategy. Apparently, his website used half the buzzwords he stole from my original presentations. But the sad truth is, you can't build a business on a foundation of smoke. Clients started pulling out. He slashed his rates. The site eventually went offline. By contrast, my career took off. I was invited to join a mentorship circle for rising leaders. Our company featured our team's turnaround story in an internal newsletter that got circulated company-wide. Even employees from other regions started asking to transfer to our department. We were no longer the forgotten back-office function. We were the engine room of the whole operation. But through it all, I never forgot how close I came to walking away. There were nights during Craig's reign when I'd sit alone in my apartment, staring at a blank screen, wondering if anything I did even mattered. I had drafted resignation letters, applied for jobs in other industries, fantasized about quitting and moving to a cabin in the woods, and I came this close to doing it. But I didn't. And now, every time someone on my team gets credit for their own work, every time a junior employee steps into a leadership role for the first time, every time we hit a deadline without burning out, I remember that version of me, the one who stayed up late documenting files, the one who started planting seeds when everything around him felt futile. That guy didn't just survive Craig, he beat him. Not with rage, not with revenge fantasies or office drama, but with patience, precision, and a quiet belief that eventually the truth always finds its way to the surface, even if you have to help it along. I should have known Craig wouldn't go down quietly. For someone like him, someone who lived off attention and manipulated credit like currency, silence wasn't a setback, it was a wound. And wounded people don't always walk away. Sometimes they come back swinging. It had been 5 months since I'd taken over as director, and our team was thriving. The post-merger chaos had calmed, our new systems were working smoothly, and most days I barely thought about Craig. Occasionally, his name would pop up in conversation, always with the same tone you'd use when talking about an ex you don't miss. Most people assumed he'd moved on to something else. Some didn't care. A few wondered if he'd ever reach out or try to rejoin the company in another capacity. I always shook my head. Craig had too much pride to crawl back. Or so I thought. It started with a LinkedIn post. One morning, I opened my feed and saw a wall of text written by none other than Craig himself. His profile had been revamped with a new headshot, a vague job title, Strategic Leadership Advisor, and a dramatic post titled, "What Corporate Culture Gets Wrong About Talent." I clicked out of curiosity. What I read made my jaw tighten. The entire post was a thinly veiled jab at me, our team, and the company. He never mentioned us by name, of course, but he didn't have to. The phrases were carefully chosen. When junior staffers manipulate optics to climb ladders, the danger of confusing confidence with competence, how leadership gets hijacked by those who know how to look busy but contribute little. I read the whole thing twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. It was filled with passive-aggressive digs and false humility. "I've made mistakes," he wrote, like trusting people who turned around and used my guidance as ammunition to discredit me. And of course, it ended with a pitch for his consulting business, offering help to companies struggling with internal sabotage and talent misalignment. The post got a few dozen likes, most from people outside the company, a few of his old allies. At first I laughed. It was petty, desperate, a man clinging to relevance through carefully coded bitterness. But then, the email started. It turns out Craig had reached out to several of our senior executives privately. His messages were framed as professional insights about how our department had become dysfunctional under my leadership. He accused me of creating a cult of personality, inflating performance metrics, and pushing out dissenting voices, namely his. He even attached cherry-picked files and half-finished reports with his name on them, claiming they proved he'd done most of the work I was now taking credit for. He was trying to rewrite history. Fortunately, I'd spent too long documenting the truth for his version to stick. Alina called me into her office that same week. She was holding a printed copy of Craig's email. "I trust you," she said, sliding it across the table, "but I want you to see what he's saying." I read it carefully. He hadn't changed much, still the same slippery language, still refusing to take responsibility, still spinning narratives like a wannabe politician on a talk show. "I've got receipts," I told her, keeping my voice calm. "I know," she said, "but let's make it official." That afternoon, I compiled everything. Not just the original documentation I'd built during my rise, but the recent work, the project timelines, the contribution logs, the mentorship outcomes, the cross-functional initiatives we'd launched since I became director. I created a presentation that didn't just defend my work, it celebrated it, and I delivered it in person to the executive team the next day. What Craig didn't understand was that I had already built something real. My team wasn't loyal to me out of fear or convenience. They respected me because I made space for them to grow. And when the execs reached out to verify my story, every single person backed me. Not because I asked them to, but because they wanted to. One junior staffer told Alina, "Working under my name made me remember why I joined this company in the first place. Another wrote an unsolicited email to the leadership team detailing how our department had transformed under the new leadership. Someone even dug up an old team email thread where Craig had dismissed the need for a mentorship program, something that had since become one of our most successful initiatives. In the end, Craig's attempt to set the record straight did nothing but remind everyone why he was removed in the first place. Still, I wasn't satisfied. It wasn't enough to survive another one of his tantrums. I wanted to put the final nail in the coffin, not for revenge, but for closure. So I did something bold. I submitted a talk proposal to an upcoming leadership summit hosted by our parent company's executive network. My proposed topic? Reclaiming attribution, building a culture where everyone gets credit. It was approved. 3 weeks later, I stood on a stage in front of hundreds of professionals, some from my company, others from across the industry. I didn't name Craig. I didn't need to. Instead, I told the story of how invisible work becomes a systemic issue when leaders are allowed to hoard recognition. I spoke about building trust through transparency, about breaking cycles of fear and fostering environments where credit flows down, not just up. I showed real metrics, real outcomes, and real testimonials. The response was overwhelming. Afterward, attendees came up to shake my hand. Some shared their own horror stories. Others asked how they could replicate our model. A vice president from another division asked if I'd be willing to train their leadership team. And later that week, the keynote clips were posted online, racking up views, shares, and comments from employees across the entire company. Craig never contacted me again. I heard he'd abandoned his consulting site shortly after. One of his last blog posts was titled, "When Your Work Gets Stolen, a Cautionary Tale." It was riddled with paranoia, spelling errors, and a tone that screamed desperation. Meanwhile, our department was recognized with an Internal Excellence Award, the kind that used to go to Craig back when he was standing on other people's shoulders. This time, though, the team stood together. No one person took the spotlight. We rotated presenters. Everyone spoke. Everyone was heard. It felt right. Looking back now, I don't feel angry when I think about Craig. I feel grateful. He taught me what leadership isn't. He taught me how easy it is for talented people to become invisible in the wrong environment. And he taught me that revenge isn't always about crushing someone. Sometimes it's about shining so brightly that the shadows can't cling to you anymore. It's been a little over a year since Craig vanished from my professional life, and not a single day has gone by where I wished I'd handled things differently. I know that's not a very Reddit thing to say. Most revenge stories live in that gray area between "I went too far" and "maybe I should have just walked away." But I didn't, and I don't regret it. Not even a little. That might sound cold. Maybe it is, but the truth is the only reason I even had to do what I did was because I let things slide for far too long. I let myself believe that being useful was enough, that being valuable would eventually be recognized, even if I never raised my voice or asked for credit. I thought meritocracy would win in the end, that the people in charge had to see through the noise eventually. They didn't, not until I made them. There was a version of this story that ended very differently. I've thought about it a lot. There's a world where I quietly left that company, where I swallowed my pride, polished up my resume, and started over somewhere new. Maybe I would have landed another analyst role. Maybe I would have climbed another ladder, under another Craig, watching someone else reap the rewards of my sweat. I think about that sometimes. What would have happened if I hadn't documented everything, hadn't taken the risk, hadn't bet on myself? It's a sad version of me. One that still exists in a lot of offices across the world. There's no shortage of Craigs out there. People who smile in meetings and steal in silence. People who can sniff out talent the same way a shark smells blood, not to nurture it, but to feed off of it. And the worst part? Most of them get away with it, for years, sometimes forever. But here's the thing. No one tells you. People like Craig don't just rise because they're clever. They rise because we let them, because we downplay our own instincts, because we don't want to make waves, because we're taught that speaking up makes you look bitter or emotional or difficult, especially if you're young, especially if you're new, especially if you're not part of the inner circle. And that's how it festers. That's how people like him get away with doing nothing but taking credit for everything. When I think back to the early days, before the promotion, before the documentation, before the slow, patient unraveling of Craig's grip, I remember the exhaustion most. Not the kind that comes from long hours or hard work, but the kind that seeps into your bones when you know your best isn't being seen. That quiet, gnawing dread that maybe it never will be. That maybe you'll always be background noise to someone else's highlight reel. But something shifted when I realized I didn't need permission to start protecting myself. That I could advocate for my work without becoming the villain. That I could take notes, keep records, and quietly build a case, not just to get Craig out of the way, but to clear a path for the people behind me. Because that was always the part that got to me most. Not just what he did to me, but what he did to all of us. How many ideas he buried, how many voices he muted, how many rising stars he extinguished before they could even catch fire. He didn't just block me from growing, he was choking the entire department. And once he was gone, it was like opening the windows after years of stale air. People breathed easier. They sat up straighter. They spoke. I watched junior analysts grow into leaders. I watched interns pitch ideas with confidence. I watched late bloomers find their rhythm because they were finally given room to fail, learn, and improve without fear of being scapegoated. And I didn't have to become a tyrant to make that happen. I just had to make sure everyone knew what I knew, that the only real power worth having is the kind you use to lift others, not step on them. There's one moment I think about a lot. It was months after the summit where I gave that keynote about attribution. A young woman from another department stopped me in the cafeteria. I didn't know her name. She said, "Hey, sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say your talk really stuck with me. I used to stay late helping my manager with reports, and he always said we were a team effort. But I never saw my name on anything. After your talk, I asked if I could present next time. He said yes." I thanked her, told her how proud I was. But what I didn't tell her was how deeply that moment landed with me. Because that was it. That was the point of everything I'd done. All the planning, all the patience, all the carefully laid traps and perfectly timed receipts. It wasn't just to see Craig fall, it was to see people like her rise. To see someone who used to sit quietly behind a spreadsheet now stand at the front of the room, laser pointer in hand, owning the spotlight they earned. That's what Craig never understood. He thought leadership was about appearances, about keeping control, about staying just far enough ahead of the truth that no one could catch up. But real leadership isn't a sprint. It's a ripple. One small act of courage inspires another. One decision to document your own work instead of letting it disappear. One meeting where you let a junior team member take the lead. One conversation where you finally say, "Actually, that was my idea." Those ripples turn into waves. And Craig? He was just the rock that sank when the tide came in. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what he tells himself now. Does he really believe he was wronged? That I manipulated everyone? That I stole the credit he rightfully earned? Maybe. People like him often rewrite their own narratives so they can sleep at night. Maybe he's out there still looking for someone else to latch on to, someone else to shine for him. But I doubt he'll ever find someone willing to stay in his shadow long enough. Not now. Not when people are starting to speak up. Not when companies are beginning to pay attention. Not when younger generations are demanding transparency and respect. Not just job titles and ping-pong tables. And me? I'm doing exactly what I set out to do, leading with integrity, protecting my team, and building a legacy that can't be stolen with a smile and a slide deck. So if you're reading this and you're where I once was, quiet, tired, overlooked, I want you to know something. You're not imagining it. You're not overreacting. And no, you're not just lucky to be here. You belong here, and your work deserves to be seen. So take notes. Save the files, ask for credit, raise your hand, and when someone tries to clip your wings in the name of teamwork, remember that your light was never meant to be dimmed so someone else could shine. Revenge doesn't always look like a confrontation. Sometimes it looks like a promotion. Sometimes it looks like a packed room applauding your name. And sometimes it just looks like peace.